On January 8, 1966, the 1st Infantry Division launched Operation Crimp in the Kyu Chi district northwest of Saigon. The objective was routine: search and destroy operations against suspected Viet Cong positions. A soldier spotted a small opening in the ground, barely large enough for a man's fist. When engineers investigated, they discovered it was the entrance to a tunnel. The initial assessment estimated a few hundred meters of underground passages, maybe some weapons caches. They were off by about 249 kilometers. The Kyu Chi tunnel complex wasn't just a few holes in the ground. It was an entire underground city that had been under construction for more than 2 decades. The Viet Cong had built 250 kilometers of interconnected tunnels on 3 separate levels. Some passages descended 30 feet below the surface. Others went down to 40 feet, deep enough to survive almost anything the US could drop on them. This wasn't a defensive position, it was infrastructure. Living quarters where entire companies could sleep, hospitals with operating rooms, weapons factories producing grenades and mines, storage depots stocked with rice and ammunition, command centers coordinating operations across the region. The ventilation systems were disguised as termite mounds, so perfect that American soldiers walked past them dozens of times without noticing. Trap doors were hidden under leaves, submerged in streams, concealed in the floors of peasant huts. Some entrances were so small that only a person weighing less than 100 pounds could squeeze through. The engineering was sophisticated in ways that shocked American commanders. The Vietnamese had been building these tunnels since the war against the French, starting in the 1940s. The red clay soil around Kyu Chi was perfect for the job. It held its shape without wooden supports. The tunnel designs used zigzag patterns that prevented blast waves from traveling more than a few meters, multiple levels connected through vertical shafts that could be sealed off. Some sections included flooded chambers, specifically designed to stop gas and smoke from penetrating deeper into the complex. Parts of the system were reinforced well enough to survive B-52 strikes. The US military had trained for conventional warfare in open terrain. They had doctrine for jungle combat, for urban fighting, for amphibious assaults. They had no doctrine for underground combat, no specialized equipment. No one in the chain of command had ever faced anything like this. The standard American response to tunnels was overwhelming firepower, call in airstrikes, drop artillery on the area, bring in bulldozers, and cave the whole thing in. But the intelligence value of what was inside those tunnels was too important to destroy. Someone had to go down there. The question was, who would be crazy enough to volunteer? The US Army never created a tunnel rat military occupational specialty. There was no official selection process, no school, no training program. The men who went into those tunnels were all volunteers, every single one. The typical tunnel rat was small, usually under 140 pounds, because that's what the tunnels demanded. Many were in their late teens or early 20s. A disproportionate number came from working-class backgrounds, the kind of soldiers who enlisted rather than getting drafted, who'd already proven they were willing to do hard jobs nobody else wanted. But size and background weren't requirements. The only real qualification was willingness. No tunnel warfare school existed anywhere in the US military. There was no field manual, no standardized tactics, no training pipeline. The first tunnel rats learned their job through trial and error. Survival meant improvisation. Knowledge passed from soldier to soldier, unit to unit, often in the form of whispered advice before a mission. Don't use your flashlight unless you absolutely have to. Listen more than you look. If you feel a tripwire, the average life expectancy once inside a hostile tunnel was measured in minutes, not hours. Robert Baer served with the 1st Infantry Division. When asked why he volunteered, he said someone had to do it, and he figured better him than sending someone who didn't want to go. Some men volunteered for the extra combat pay, $50 per month. Others did it because their unit needed someone and they didn't want to let their buddies down. Many couldn't explain why. They just felt compelled. The equipment situation was a disaster. Standard issue for a tunnel rat was a flashlight, a .45 caliber pistol, and a combat knife. That's it. The flashlight made you a target the second you turned it on, so many rats learned to fight in complete darkness. The M16 was too long for tunnel combat. Some soldiers carried .38 caliber revolvers from home, others improvised weapons, sharpened entrenching tools, bayonets duct taped to broomsticks. Body armor wouldn't fit through the tunnels. Helmets were useless when the ceiling was 2 feet high. Communications gear didn't work underground. So once you went down, you were on your own. Tunnel rats started making their own modifications. They carried CS gas grenades, though these often didn't work because the tunnel ventilation systems were too good. They used flashlights with red filters that were less visible. Some tied lengths of rope around their ankles so teammates above ground could pull them out if something went wrong. .22 caliber pistols became popular because they were quieter than .45s. The 25th Infantry Division eventually issued specialized equipment, silenced pistols, headlamps, protective masks. But this didn't happen until years into the war, long after hundreds of men had already gone down with nothing but a flashlight and a prayer. By mid-1967, every major US unit operating near Cu Chi, the Iron Triangle, and the Cambodian border had soldiers entering tunnels multiple times per week. The army still had no official tunnel rat program. The darkness underground wasn't like darkness above ground. It was complete, absolute. The kind of darkness where you couldn't see your hand 6 inches from your face. A flashlight gave away your position instantly, so most tunnel rats learned to fight blind. Disorientation set in within seconds. There was no sense of direction, no way to know if you were crawling deeper or heading back toward the entrance. The tunnels themselves were designed for people who weren't there. 2 to 3 feet high in most sections, some even narrower. American soldiers crawled on their stomachs for hundreds of feet at a time. There was no room to turn around. Getting stuck meant death. The walls pressed in from all sides. The air was recycled, stale, sometimes toxic. Every breath felt like it might be the last one available. The Viet Cong had spent years perfecting their defenses. Punji stakes, bamboo spikes dipped in human waste, waited in the darkness. Tripwires connected to grenades were strung across passages at ankle height or face level. Some chambers contained scorpions deliberately placed there, bamboo vipers and crates. Some of the deadliest snakes in Vietnam were released into sections of tunnel. The VC knew which passages held them. The Americans didn't. False floors concealed spiked pits, doors sealed and flooded chambers with contaminated water. Some traps were designed specifically not to kill, but to wound, because screaming drew other soldiers into the kill zone. The enemy had every advantage. The Viet Cong knew every inch of their tunnels and could navigate in total darkness. They were smaller, lighter, accustomed to the environment. They often waited in ambush at tunnel junctions or in small chambers just large enough for one man. Close quarters combat meant knives, bare hands, sometimes just trying to strangle the other person before they could raise an alarm. There were no rules down there, no surrender. Bodies couldn't always be recovered. The VC engaged in deliberate psychological warfare. They would whisper in the darkness, make fake sounds to draw tunnel rats into traps. American dog tags and equipment were left as bait. Mock screams echoed through the passages. The worst part was knowing someone was down there, but not where. The environmental conditions alone were enough to break men. The tunnels reeked of human waste used as fertilizer in the fields above. Decomposing bodies, some months old, lay in sealed chambers. Rats, the animal kind, infested the tunnels by the thousands. Insects, centipedes, spiders crawled over everything. Standing water filled with parasites collected in low points. Air quality deteriorated the deeper you went. Carbon monoxide from cooking fires accumulated in poorly ventilated sections. Some tunnel rats passed out from lack of oxygen and had to be dragged out by teammates.
When we'd come to a tunnel, there'd be 3 guys outside. I'd go in, The first thing you watched for was gooks down at the bottom. There was a step off, and then it usually opened up into a small room. Well, that's usually where you found most of your booby traps, your punji sticks, spiders, rats, scorpions. And there's such a small area to move around in, and they're dark. They're pitch black, just damn near, just pitch black. It was almost like being a blind person. And you went by touch and smell and hearing. You think people seen big rats? These were like dogs.
In March 1967, Sergeant Robert Baer was clearing a tunnel near Ben Cat. 40 feet down, the passage split three ways. He chose left. 20 feet later, he came face to face with a Viet Cong soldier. Both men froze. There was no room to maneuver. Baer's flashlight had died. Contact was made by touch. They fought with knives in total darkness for what felt like hours. The actual time was 3 minutes. Baer killed the enemy soldier. It took him 45 minutes to crawl back out. He never went down another tunnel. The statistics don't capture the reality. Between 1966 and 1971, an estimated 500 to 600 American soldiers entered the Cu Chi Tunnel complex alone. The casualty rate was approximately 33%. But many more were wounded psychologically, in ways that wouldn't show up for years. When the war ended, the tunnel rats went home. There was no debriefing specific to underground combat, no recognition as a specialized unit, no special treatment or compensation. As far as the army was concerned, it was just another infantry job. The men who had crawled through hell were expected to readjust to normal life like everyone else. The psychological toll became clear decades later. PTSD rates among tunnel rats are estimated between 60 and 80%. Claustrophobia developed even in men who had never experienced it before going underground. Night terrors persisted for decades. Many found themselves unable to be in enclosed spaces. Some couldn't ride elevators. Others couldn't sleep in rooms with closed doors. Substance abuse rates were significantly higher than the general veteran population. One former tunnel rat from the 25th Infantry Division, who asked not to be named, described his experience. He did 14 tunnel missions in 8 months. He hasn't been in a basement since 1969. He still can't sleep without a light on. Sometimes he wakes up and he's back in that tunnel, and he can't breathe. Recognition came slowly, incompletely. The first tunnel rat reunions were organized in the 1990s. The Tunnel Rats Association was formally established in 2009, but there has never been an official military decoration specific to tunnel service. Purple Hearts were earned, Bronze Stars and Silver Stars were awarded, but there was no unique recognition for the specific nature of what these men endured. Some received no recognition at all. The legacy exists in doctrine and training. Modern military tunnel warfare procedures exist because of what Vietnam tunnel rats learned through trial and error. Training facilities have been built to simulate tunnel combat. Specialized equipment has been developed. But it all came too late for the men who went down first. The numbers tell part of the story. An estimated 5,000 to 10,000 American soldiers entered Viet Cong tunnels during the war. At least 500 were killed or wounded in tunnel combat. Countless more were psychologically destroyed. But numbers don't capture the darkness, the terror of being trapped, the knowledge that every breath might be your last, the feeling of earth pressing in from all sides, the certainty that if something went wrong, no one could save you. The tunnel rats weren't looking for glory. Most didn't tell their families what they'd done until decades later. They went into those holes because someone had to. They faced terrors that most people can't imagine. And they did it knowing the army would never officially acknowledge what they'd been through. Every single one of them was a volunteer. The story of the tunnel rats is just one example of how soldiers in Vietnam adapted to impossible conditions with no training and inadequate equipment. If you want to understand what this war was really like, subscribe to Inside the Vietnam War. because here we cover everything,